The shotgun blast through the night sky startled Tabitha Mason, but not as much as the realization that she was about to be discovered. Her hands froze on the horse brush, the exhausted mare beside her nickering softly as the barn door swung open. A tall silhouette filled the doorway, moonlight glinting off the barrel of his shotgun. "Don't move," came the deep, measured voice. "I've got enough troubles without finding thieves in my barn." Wyoming Territory, 1878, was no place for a woman alone, especially one on the run. Tabitha took a shaky breath and turned slowly, keeping her hands visible. "I'm not stealing," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Just needed shelter for the night. I'll be gone by morning." The man stepped into the lantern light, revealing a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, piercing blue even in the dim light, assessed her with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. He lowered the shotgun slightly. "I don't mind company long as you're honest," he said, his gaze moving from her face to the meager belongings piled in the corner. "And that story you just told me wasn't the whole truth." Tabitha swallowed hard. The man before her wasn't just any rancher. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew this land, who had faced its harshness and survived. His clothes were worn but well kept, his stance relaxed yet alert. "My name is Tabitha Mason," she said finally. "I'm traveling to Oregon." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. "Andrew Blackwood," he replied, propping his shotgun against a post. "This is my ranch, and Oregon's still a mighty long way from here." He gestured to her dress, mud splattered and torn at the hem. "You running from something or someone, Miss Mason?" "Just looking for a new start," she said, turning back to the mare, running the brush along its flank with trembling hands. "That's my horse you're tending to," Andrew remarked, stepping closer. "She was favoring her left front leg," Tabitha explained. "There was a stone, I removed it." Andrew's expression softened slightly. "You know horses?" "My father raised them," she said, the memory bittersweet, "before he died." Andrew studied her for a long moment. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, rattling the barn walls. "It's going to storm tonight," he said finally. "You can stay in the house. Got a spare room that's better than this barn floor." Tabitha stiffened. "I'm fine here." "Suit yourself," Andrew shrugged. "But there's hot food in the house if you change your mind. And Miss Mason," she looked up, meeting his gaze, "whatever you're running from, it won't find you tonight, not in this weather." With that, he collected his shotgun and turned toward the door. Tabitha watched him go, her heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't expected kindness, not after everything that had happened. As the barn door closed behind him, Tabitha sank down onto a hay bale, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. 3 days of hard riding, sleeping in ditches and abandoned shacks, had left her body aching and her spirit nearly broken. She glanced at her saddlebags, knowing the contents would condemn her if found. The storm hit with sudden fury an hour later. Rain lashed against the barn, finding every crack and seam, dripping through in a dozen places. Thunder crashed overhead, making the horses nervous. Tabitha did her best to calm them, but when water began pooling on the floor, she knew she couldn't stay. Gathering her belongings, she made a dash for the house, rain soaking her to the skin in seconds. By the time she reached the porch, she was shivering uncontrollably. She hesitated before knocking, wondering if this was another mistake in a long string of them. The door opened before her knuckles touched wood. Andrew stood there as if he'd been watching for her. "Thought you might reconsider," he said, stepping aside to let her in. The warmth of the house enveloped her immediately. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across a simple but comfortable living area. The smell of coffee and something savory made her stomach growl audibly. "Sit," Andrew instructed, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "You're dripping on my floor." Tabitha sank gratefully into the chair, setting her saddlebags carefully beside her. "Thank you," she said, her teeth chattering slightly. Andrew disappeared into another room, returning with a blanket which he draped around her shoulders. "Coffee's hot," he said, pouring a cup and pressing it into her hands. "Food's almost ready." Tabitha curled her fingers around the warm mug. "Why are you helping me?" Andrew's expression was unreadable as he turned back to the stove. Been out on the trail myself enough times to know what it's like to be cold, wet, and hungry, he said. Besides, my ma would haunt me if I let anyone, especially a woman, sleep in a leaky barn during a storm. He ladled stew into a bowl and placed it before her with a chunk of bread. Eat, he instructed. Then you can tell me what kind of trouble you're in. What makes you think I'm in trouble? Tabitha asked between eager spoonfuls of the surprisingly good stew. Andrew gave her a knowing look. Women traveling alone through Wyoming Territory don't do it for pleasure, Miss Mason. She ate in silence for a moment, considering her options. This man had shown her kindness when he could have just as easily sent her back into the storm. Maybe the truth or some version of it was what she owed him. My stepfather arranged a marriage for me, she said finally. To a man 3 times my age with a reputation for cruelty, I refused, he insisted. Her hand unconsciously touched her cheek where a fading bruise still showed under the dirt. So I left. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he merely nodded. Your stepfather have a name, William Hargrove, she replied. He's a banker in Cheyenne. Recognition flashed in Andrew's eyes. Hargrove, he repeated, owns half the mortgages in the territory, not a man to cross lightly. Fear clutched at Tabitha's heart. You know him, know of him, Andrew clarified. Our paths crossed once, wasn't pleasant. He studied her face. How long ago did you leave? 3 days, she admitted. He'll have men looking for me by now. 3 days, Andrew repeated, thoughtful. And you came north rather than west. Smart. They'll be watching the main routes to Oregon. Tabitha set down her spoon, suddenly wary. How do you know I was headed for Oregon? A small smile tugged at the corner of Andrew's mouth. You told me, remember, she flushed, embarrassed by her suspicion after his kindness. I'm sorry, it's been difficult to know who to trust. Trust is earned, Andrew said simply. Get some rest. Spare rooms down the hall, first door on the right. We'll figure things out in the morning. Tabitha hesitated. Mr. Blackwood, I can't stay. If Hargrove's men track me here, they won't, he interrupted. Not tonight, at least. Storms turn the roads to mud, and it's Andrew, not Mr. Blackwood. That was my father. Tabitha nodded, gathering her saddlebags. Thank you, Andrew. One more thing, he said as she turned toward the hallway. Whatever you're carrying in those bags that you're so protective of, I don't want to know, unless it puts my ranch in danger. Tabitha's grip tightened on the leather straps. It's nothing dangerous, she assured him. Just important to me, Andrew nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good night, Miss Mason. Tabitha, she corrected softly, if I'm to call you Andrew. Something shifted in his eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Good night, Tabitha. The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt. Tabitha locked the door behind her, more out of habit than fear of her host. She changed into her last set of dry clothes, a simple cotton nightgown, and hung her wet dress near the small fireplace that Andrew had thoughtfully lit before her arrival. Carefully, she opened her saddlebags and removed a wrapped bundle. Inside were papers, deeds, bank drafts, and letters. Evidence of her stepfather's years of fraud and theft, including the property that had rightfully belonged to her mother, then to Tabitha after her death. Property that William had claimed as his own, using forged documents and threats. Tabitha had taken them the night she fled, knowing they were her only leverage against a man with influence throughout the territory. She rewrapped the bundle and tucked it under her mattress, before finally allowing herself to sink into the first real bed she'd had in days. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Dreams of pounding hooves and angry men with guns jolted her awake more than once. But each time, the sound of the rain against the window and the knowledge of solid walls around her lulled her back to uneasy slumber. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the curtains. For a moment, Tabitha was disoriented, the comfortable bed a stark contrast to her recent accommodations. Then memory flooded back the barn, the storm, Andrew Blackwood's unexpected hospitality. She dressed quickly in her now dry clothes, retrieved her precious documents, and made her way to the main room. Andrew was already up, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the house. Morning, he greeted, not looking up from the stove. Sleep well. Better than I have in days, she admitted, hovering uncertainly at the edge of the kitchen. Thank you again for your kindness. Andrew gestured to the table. Sit, eat, then we need to talk. The directness of his manner was somehow comforting, no pretense, no hidden meanings. Tabitha sat and accepted the plate he placed before her, eggs, bacon, and biscuits still steaming from the oven. You cook well for a bachelor, she observed between bites. Necessity, he replied with a slight shrug. Been on my own since my father died 5 years ago. The ranch is yours alone. She asked, looking around the modest but well-kept house. 2,000 acres, he confirmed, pride evident in his voice. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine, free and clear. His expression darkened slightly, though Hargroves tried to change that a time or two. Tabitha set down her fork. What do you mean? Andrew poured himself more coffee before answering. Your stepfather has a habit of acquiring land by any means necessary, offered to buy me out 3 times. When I refused, he tried raising my taxes, claiming survey errors on my boundaries, even diverting water from my creek. That sounds like William, Tabitha said bitterly. He did the same to my mother's land after they married. By the time she died, he'd managed to put everything in his name. Andrew studied her across the table. Is that what's in your saddlebags, proof of his schemes? Tabitha hesitated, then nodded slowly. Documents that show how he forged my mother's signature, backdated deeds, bribed officials. I was going to take them to the territorial governor in Oregon. That's a dangerous plan, Andrew observed. Men like Hargrove don't let evidence like that simply walk away. I know, Tabitha replied, her voice hardening, but I won't let him steal what's rightfully mine. My mother worked too hard for that land. Andrew's expression was thoughtful as he cleared their plates. What exactly did your mother own? The Silver Creek Ranch, Tabitha said. 5,000 acres along the Laramie River. My father built it from nothing before he died. It was supposed to be my inheritance. Andrew's eyebrows rose. Silver Creek is yours, that's prime grazing land. It was, Tabitha corrected. Now it's William's, according to the county records. He's planning to sell it to the railroad once they bring the line through. Andrew leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. So you took evidence that could ruin him and ran. No wonder he wants you found. Fear crept back into Tabitha's heart. I should leave today. I've already put you at risk by staying this long. And go where? Andrew challenged. Oregon's still weeks away, and Hargrove's men will be watching every road west. I'll find another way, she insisted. Perhaps north to Montana Territory, then west. Andrew shook his head. The passes will be watched too, and that route takes you through Sioux Territory. Not safe for anyone traveling alone right now. Tabitha's frustration mounted. What would you have me do? Return to Cheyenne and marry the monster William chose for me? No, Andrew said firmly, but rushing off half-cocked will just get you caught or worse. He rose from the table and walked to the window, gazing out at his land, now glistening in the morning sun after the night's rain. Stay here, he said finally, just for a few days. Give Hargrove's men time to move on, looking elsewhere. Tabitha stared at him, stunned by the offer. Why would you risk that? You barely know me. Andrew turned, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Because I've seen what men like Hargrove do to people who stand in their way, and because. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I believe you're telling the truth. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a connection, an understanding that went beyond their brief acquaintance. Tabitha found herself nodding. A few days, she agreed, but I can't just hide. I need to earn my keep. A smile tugged at Andrew's lips. Fair enough. Can you cook better than I can? That wouldn't be difficult, she teased, surprised by her own boldness. Andrew's smile widened, transforming his weathered face. Then we have a deal. You handle the cooking, help with the horses, and stay out of sight if anyone comes calling. I'll keep you safe until we figure out a better plan than running blind. Deal, Tabitha agreed, extending her hand. Andrew took it, his calloused palm warm against hers. The contact lingered a moment longer than necessary, sending an unexpected flutter through Tabitha's chest. First thing, Andrew said, releasing her hand, we need to make sure you can't be spotted from the road. The ranch hands will be back from the north pasture in 2 days. They're good men, but the fewer people who know you're here, the better. Tabitha nodded, understanding the logic. What should I do if someone comes while you're out working? There's a cellar under the kitchen, Andrew explained. Entrance is hidden by the pantry. If you hear riders approaching and I'm not here, that's where you go. The seriousness of their situation settled over Tabitha once more. This wasn't just about her freedom anymore, she was putting this man's life and livelihood at risk. Andrew, she said softly, if this becomes too dangerous, I'll leave. I won't see you hurt because of me. Andrew's expression softened. I've faced worse odds than an angry banker, Tabitha. Besides, he added with a wry smile, having someone to cook decent meals might be worth the risk. Despite her anxiety, Tabitha found herself smiling back. For the first time since fleeing Cheyenne, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps here in this unexpected sanctuary, she could catch her breath and find a way forward that didn't end in capture or worse. The next few days fell into a surprising rhythm. Andrew rose before dawn to tend to the cattle and horses, returning mid-morning for a proper breakfast that Tabitha prepared. She spent her days cleaning the house, which clearly hadn't seen a woman's touch in years, and helping with the smaller ranch chores. Andrew taught her about his operation, the cattle breeds he favored, his plans for expanding the horse breeding program, the challenges of ranching in territory still relatively wild. Tabitha soaked up the knowledge eagerly, finding parallels to her father's teachings years ago. On the third morning, as they sat at breakfast, Andrew seemed preoccupied. The hands will be back tomorrow, he reminded her. Jake, Thomas, and Lewis. Good men, but Jake especially talks when he drinks, and the last thing we need is word getting back to Hargrove. Tabitha nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. The sanctuary of the past few days had begun to feel almost normal. Should I stay in the cellar while they're here? Andrew shook his head. That won't work long term. I've been thinking about it, and I believe I have a solution. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. It requires some deception. What kind of deception? Tabitha asked cautiously. My cousin from back east, Andrew explained. Tabitha could be my cousin, come to help after hearing I was on my own out here. Family visiting wouldn't raise eyebrows and would explain your presence. Tabitha considered the idea. Your cousin wouldn't contradict this story later. No cousins left to contradict anything, Andrew said simply. Family's all gone now. There was a story there, Tabitha sensed, but now wasn't the time to pry. It could work, she agreed, but what about my real identity if Hargrove's men come asking about Tabitha Mason? You'd be Tabitha Blackwood, Andrew said. Different enough that casual questions wouldn't connect the two, but close enough to your real name that you'd respond naturally. It was a solid plan, Tabitha had to admit. How long do you think we can maintain this fiction? Andrew's eyes met hers across the table. As long as needed. Until we find a way to use those documents of yours safely. We, Tabitha repeated softly. Yes, we, Andrew confirmed, his voice firm. Hargrove has caused enough harm in these parts. If you have evidence that could stop him, I want to help. Gratitude welled up in Tabitha's chest, along with something else she wasn't ready to name. Thank you, she said simply. Knowing the words were inadequate for what he was offering, Andrew nodded, a man of few words but meaningful actions. The hands will expect a hot meal when they return, he said, changing the subject. Think you can manage a feast for hungry cowboys? Tabitha smiled, grateful for the shift to practical matters. I believe I can handle that challenge. The rest of the day was spent preparing for the ranch hands' return, cleaning the bunkhouse, organizing supplies, and planning meals. By evening, Tabitha was exhausted but satisfied with their preparations. They sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It's beautiful here, Tabitha said softly. Different from the valley where I grew up, but beautiful in its own way. Andrew nodded, his profile gilded by the fading light. Took me a while to see it. When my father first brought us here from Missouri, I thought it was the most desolate place I'd ever seen. No trees to speak of, just endless grass and sky. What changed your mind? Tabitha asked, curious about this glimpse into his past. Andrew considered the question. First winter, he said finally. Blizzard hit worst in years according to the old-timers. Thought we'd lose everything, but when spring came the land just woke up. Wildflowers everywhere, new calves, the creek running full. Realized then that this place has a strength to it, endurance. Tabitha smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. My father used to say something similar about our valley, that the land teaches you to bend without breaking. Smart man, your father, Andrew observed. He was, Tabitha agreed, memories bittersweet. I wish he'd lived to see me grow up, maybe things would have been different. Andrew turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. Can't change what's past, he said gently, but you're honoring him by fighting for what's rightfully yours. His words touched something deep within her. Most men would have told her to accept her fate, to let go of her inheritance as a lost cause. But Andrew understood. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics as night fell, books they'd read, places they'd seen, funny stories from childhood. Tabitha found herself laughing more than she had in years, the weight of her situation temporarily lifted by Andrew's dry humor and genuine interest in her thoughts. When they finally retired for the night, Tabitha lay awake in her bed, pondering the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been desperate and alone, fleeing from a future she couldn't bear. Now she was planning to pose as a man's cousin, hiding from bounty hunters on a remote ranch with documents that could bring down one of the territory's most powerful men. And strangest of all, she felt safer than she had in years. The ranch hands returned the next day around noon, 3 dust-covered men on tired horses. Tabitha watched nervously from the window as Andrew greeted them, explaining her presence with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to giving orders that weren't questioned. Jake was the oldest, with a weathered face and graying beard. Thomas was younger, perhaps 30, with an easy smile. Lewis was the youngest, barely 20 by Tabitha's estimation, with quick eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Andrew brought them to the house for introductions, his hand reassuringly solid at the small of Tabitha's back as they entered. Boys, this is my cousin Tabitha Blackwood from back east, he announced. She'll be staying with us for a while, helping around the ranch. Tabitha smiled, hoping her nervousness wasn't visible. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I've prepared dinner if you're hungry after your journey. The men removed their hats, suddenly conscious of their trail-worn appearance in the presence of a lady. Jake, clearly the spokesman of the group, stepped forward. Madam, he said respectfully, might want to warn a fellow before bringing civilization to our doorstep. He shot a good-natured glare at Andrew. Would have at least washed the trail dust off first. Andrew's lips twitched with amusement. Thought the surprise might do you good, Jake, remind you what manners are for. The tension broken, they moved to the dining table where Tabitha had laid out a feast: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie cooling on the windowsill. The men ate with the focused appreciation of those who'd been living on trail rations for days, offering compliments between bites. Boss, you been hiding your cousin all this time? Thomas asked, reaching for another piece of bread. Seems mighty selfish, keeping cooking like this to yourself. Andrew's expression remained neutral, but Tabitha caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Tabitha only arrived recently, he said. Family situation back east changed. Tabitha picked up the cue smoothly. My father passed last winter, she explained, the lie coming easier than expected. Without family there, Andrew was kind enough to offer me a place here. Lewis, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Lo siento por tu pérdida, señorita, he said, then continued in accented English. Your father, he would be proud to see you so brave, coming to this wild place alone. Tabitha felt a pang of guilt at the young man's sincere sympathy. Thank you, Lewis. That's very kind. The conversation shifted to ranch business, cattle counts, grazing conditions, news from neighboring spreads. Tabitha served pie and coffee, listening attentively, learning the rhythms of this world that was simultaneously familiar and foreign to her. Hargrove's men were asking questions in town, Jake mentioned casually, accepting a second slice of pie. Seems his stepdaughter ran off, took some valuable papers with her, offering $100 for information. Tabitha nearly dropped the coffee pot. Andrew's gaze shot to her face, then back to Jake. "That so?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "What'd she look like, this runaway?" Jake shrugged. "Young, pretty according to the posters, dark hair, green eyes, name's Tabitha something or other." Thomas laughed. "Seems all the pretty Tabithas are causing trouble these days," he said, nodding toward her with a wink. "No offense, Miss Blackwood." "None taken," she managed, grateful that her back was to the stove, hiding her trembling hands. "Hargrove's always been one for drama," Andrew said dismissively. "Probably just a family disagreement blown out of proportion." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Could be, though $100 is serious money for just finding someone." "Money that tempting makes men careless," Andrew observed. "Best we stay focused on our own business." The men murmured agreement, and the conversation moved on to plans for the upcoming cattle drive. But Tabitha felt the weight of Jake's words settle over her. The search was closing in, and now there was a price on information leading to her capture. After the men retired to the bunkhouse for the night, Andrew found Tabitha in the kitchen, washing dishes with unnecessary vigor. "They don't suspect anything," he assured her, taking a towel to dry the plates she had cleaned. $100, she said quietly. "He's desperate enough to offer that much. He must be worried about what I took." Andrew set down the dried plate and gently turned Tabitha to face him. "This changes nothing about our plan. The men will be busy with preparations for the drive. You'll be safe here." Tabitha looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I'm putting you at risk," she whispered. "If they find out you've been harboring me—" "They won't," Andrew said firmly, his hands still resting lightly on her shoulders. "I meant what I said before. We'll find a way to use those documents to get you justice." In that moment, something shifted between them. Perhaps it was the intensity in his blue eyes, or the steady strength of his hands, or simply the unwavering support he'd shown a woman he barely knew. Whatever the cause, Tabitha felt her heart quicken, her breath catching slightly as she recognized the feeling for what it was: attraction, unexpected and inconvenient but undeniable. Andrew seemed to realize their proximity at the same moment. His hands dropped from her shoulders and he took a small step back, clearing his throat. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Tomorrow will be busy." Tabitha nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the broken moment. "Good night, Andrew." "Good night, Tabitha," he replied softly, his eyes lingering on her face before he turned and left the kitchen. Alone, Tabitha pressed her hands to her warm cheeks. This was madness. She was a fugitive with a price on her head, hiding on his ranch under false pretenses. Any feelings beyond gratitude were foolish and dangerous for both of them. Yet as she lay in bed that night, Tabitha couldn't stop her thoughts from drifting to the way Andrew's eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the gentle strength in his hands as he worked with the horses, or the unexpected depth of understanding he showed when they talked about her past. In the darkness, she allowed herself to acknowledge a truth she'd been avoiding. In less than a week, Andrew Blackwood had come to mean more to her than just a protector or ally. And that realization was both wonderful and terrifying. The days that followed fell into a new routine. Tabitha maintained her role as Andrew's cousin from back east, cooking for the ranch hands and keeping the house in order. Andrew and his men focused on preparations for the upcoming cattle drive, mending fences, checking the herd, and gathering supplies. When the men were out working, Tabitha and Andrew would review her documents, piecing together the extent of William Hargrove's schemes. The evidence was damning: falsified deeds, forged signatures, bribes to county officials, and threats to those who opposed him. "He's been building a land empire for years," Andrew observed as they spread the papers across the kitchen table one evening. "Not just your mother's property, but dozens of others. All strategically located along the proposed railroad route," Tabitha added. "Land that will be worth 10 times its current value once the line is built." Andrew nodded, examining a map where Tabitha had marked the properties Hargrove had acquired. "The question is, who do we take this to? The territorial courts are filled with his friends." "That's why I was heading to Oregon," Tabitha explained. "Governor Thayer has no ties to Wyoming politics. If he saw these documents, It's still risky, Andrew cautioned. We need someone closer, someone with authority who isn't in Hargrove's pocket. They were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Andrew quickly helped Tabitha gather the documents, tucking them into their hiding place beneath a loose floorboard in the pantry. Stay inside, he instructed, his expression tense as he moved to the window. It's not the men returning. Tabitha's heart raced as she peered around Andrew's shoulder. Two riders were approaching, dressed in the unmistakable uniforms of the territorial marshals. Lawmen, she whispered, fear clutching at her throat. Andrew, if they're looking for me, stay calm, he said firmly. Remember, you're Tabitha Blackwood, my cousin from back east, nothing more. The marshals dismounted at the hitching post, removing their hats as they approached the house. Andrew stepped onto the porch to meet them, his posture deliberately relaxed. Afternoon, gentlemen, he called. What brings the law to my doorstep? The older of the two, a gray-haired man with a weathered face, nodded in greeting. Mr. Blackwood, I'm Marshal Davis, this is Deputy Collins. Mind if we have a word? Not at all, Andrew replied, gesturing toward the house. Come in out of the sun. My cousin's just made fresh coffee. Tabitha forced her trembling hands to stillness as the men entered. She offered a polite smile, playing the role of dutiful hostess as she poured coffee into the cups she'd hastily set out. This is my cousin, Tabitha Blackwood, Andrew introduced her. Recently arrived from Missouri to help around the ranch. Marshal Davis nodded respectfully. Madam, didn't know Blackwood here had family visiting. It was somewhat unexpected, Tabitha replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Family circumstances changed, and Andrew was kind enough to offer me a place here. The marshal accepted his coffee with a nod of thanks. Well, we won't take much of your time. We're looking for a young woman who may have passed through this area. Tabitha Mason, stepdaughter to William Hargrove of Cheyenne. Andrew's expression remained neutral. Can't say I've seen any strangers in these parts other than the usual travelers on the road. What she wanted for Deputy Collins, younger and more eager, spoke up. Theft, primarily. Took some valuable papers from her stepfather's safe. Family heirloom jewelry, too, according to Mr. Hargrove. Anger flashed through Tabitha at the lie. She had taken nothing but the documents that proved Hargrove's crimes, certainly no jewelry. It was just like William to embellish the story to ensure law enforcement took his side. How unfortunate, she said carefully. I hope the poor man recovers his property. Marshal Davis studied her face for a moment longer than comfortable. Yes, madam, Mr. Hargrove is quite determined to find his stepdaughter, concerned for her safety, traveling alone and all. Andrew snorted softly. Hargrove's concern for others is well known throughout the territory, he said, sarcasm evident despite his casual tone. The marshal's lips twitched slightly. You've had dealings with Mr. Hargrove, I take it. Enough to form an opinion, Andrew replied. But that's neither here nor there. If we see this runaway stepdaughter, where should we send word? Marshal Davis produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. There's a description here and instructions for contacting Mr. Hargrove's representatives. He placed it on the table. There's a reward for information leading to her return. So we've heard, Andrew said. Seems like a lot of trouble for some papers and jewelry. The marshal's expression remained carefully neutral. Not our place to question the value folks place on their property, Mr. Blackwood. Just doing our job following up on reports. Reports? Tabitha couldn't stop herself from asking. Has someone seen this woman nearby? Deputy Collins shook his head. Nothing confirmed, madam. Just checking all the ranches and homesteads in a 50-mile radius of where she was last spotted. Relief washed through Tabitha, though she kept her expression merely curious. So they didn't have specific information placing her in this area, they were simply being thorough. The marshals finished their coffee and rose to leave. At the door, Marshal Davis paused, looking back at Tabitha. If you don't mind my saying, Miss Blackwood, you bear a striking resemblance to the young lady we're seeking. Same coloring, similar features. Tabitha's heart nearly stopped, but Andrew stepped smoothly into the tense moment. Must be a common look in these parts, he said with a casual shrug. Half the young ladies at the last town social could fit that description. Dark hair and green eyes aren't exactly rare. Marshal Davis held Tabitha's gaze for another moment, then nodded. I suppose not. Good day to you both. Thank you for the coffee, Miss Blackwood. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, Tabitha's knees finally gave way. She sank into a chair, her whole body trembling with delayed fear. He suspected, she whispered. The marshal, he knew. Andrew moved to the window, watching until the lawmen were out of sight. If he truly suspected, he wouldn't have left without questioning us further, he reasoned. But that was too close. Tabitha pressed her hands to her face. I'm putting you in an impossible position. Lying to territorial marshals is a serious offense. Andrew knelt before her chair, gently pulling her hands away from her face. Tabitha, look at me, he said softly. She raised her eyes to his, finding unexpected tenderness there. I made my choice when I invited you to stay, he said. I believe in what we're doing, stopping a man who's hurt too many people for too long. That's worth some risk. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. Why? She asked, barely above a whisper. Why risk everything for someone you barely know? Andrew's hands tightened slightly around hers. Because I know enough, he said simply. I know you're brave and determined. I know you're fighting for justice, not revenge. And I know that in the short time you've been here, you've brought something back to this ranch that's been missing for years. What's that? Tabitha asked, her heart pounding. Andrew's eyes held her steadily. Life, purpose beyond just surviving from season to season. The words hung between them, laden with meaning beyond their simple truth. Tabitha felt the last of her defenses crumbling, the walls she'd built to protect herself from further pain giving way to something far more dangerous hope. Before she could respond, the sound of horses approaching broke the moment. Andrew released her hands and moved swiftly to the window. It's just the men returning, he said, relief evident in his voice. But we need to be more careful than ever now. The marshal's visit means Hargrove's net is tightening. Tabitha nodded, gathering her composure. What do we do now? Andrew's expression turned resolute. We move forward with our plan, but we need to act soon before Hargrove's men or the law return with more specific information. That evening, after the ranch hands had gone to their quarters, Andrew and Tabitha sat at the kitchen table, poring over maps by lamplight. The territorial judge will be in Laramie next week for the circuit court, Andrew explained, tracing the route with his finger. Judge Calloway has a reputation for honesty. If anyone would listen to evidence against Hargrove, it would be him. Tabitha studied the map. Laramie is 3 days' ride from here. We'd have to leave soon to ensure we arrive before the court session ends. Andrew raised an eyebrow. Tabitha, it's too dangerous for you to go into town. Your face is on wanted posters. And who will present the evidence? She challenged. These are my mother's lands we're fighting for. I need to be there. Andrew frowned, concern etched in his features. Hargrove's men will be watching the courthouse. If they spot you, then we'll need a disguise, Tabitha insisted. I won't hide here while you take all the risk, Andrew. This is my fight. They argued back and forth, neither willing to yield. Finally, Andrew sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he said, though there was a hint of admiration beneath the exasperation. Tabitha couldn't help but smile. My father always said the same thing, called it determination when he was pleased with me, stubbornness when he wasn't. Andrew's expression softened. Your father raised a remarkable daughter, he said quietly. The compliment warmed her through. So you'll let me come with you to Laramie? Let you, Andrew repeated with a short laugh. As if I could stop you, but we do this carefully. You'll need to look different enough that no one would connect you to the posters. They spent the next hour planning their journey in Tabitha's disguise. Hair could be cut and styled differently, clothing changed to alter her silhouette. She would pose as Andrew's wife rather than cousin, a disguise that would allow them to travel together without raising eyebrows and give them privacy to discuss their plans without arousing suspicion. We'll leave in 2 days, Andrew decided. Tell the men we're visiting a sick relative in Laramie. Jake can manage things here until we return. Tabitha nodded, the reality of their dangerous undertaking settling over her. If this works, if Judge Calloway believes the evidence. Then Hargrove will face justice, Andrew finished, and you'll get back what's rightfully yours. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. For so long, Tabitha had focused solely on escape, on surviving day to day. The possibility of actually winning, of reclaiming her inheritance and seeing William Hargrove answer for his crimes seemed almost too much to hope for. "And if it doesn't work?" she asked softly. Andrew's eyes met hers across the table, his expression resolute. "Then we try something else. I won't give up, Tabitha, not until you're safe and free." The conviction in his voice touched her deeply. In that moment, Tabitha knew with sudden clarity that her feelings for Andrew had grown far beyond gratitude or even simple attraction. Somewhere along the way, amid danger and deception, she had fallen in love with this quiet, honorable man who had risked everything to help her. The realization should have frightened her. Love was a complication she couldn't afford, a vulnerability she couldn't risk. Yet instead, it filled her with a strange sense of peace, as if some missing piece had finally fallen into place. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate but unable to express the depth of her feelings without revealing too much. Andrew seemed to understand what remained unspoken. His hand reached across the table to cover hers, a simple gesture that sent warmth spreading through her. "Get some rest," he said gently. "We have much to prepare in the next 2 days." Tabitha nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand from his. As she rose to retire for the night, she paused in the doorway, looking back at Andrew still seated at the table, his strong profile illuminated by lamplight. Whatever happened in Laramie, whatever fate awaited them, Tabitha knew one thing with certainty: meeting Andrew Blackwood had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined when she'd sought shelter in his barn that stormy night. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparations. Andrew explained their planned journey to the ranch hands, who accepted the story of a sick relative without question. Jake, the foreman, received detailed instructions for managing the ranch in their absence. Tabitha worked on her disguise, shortening her long dark hair to just below her shoulders and styling it differently. From Andrew's mother's old trunk, she altered a dress in a style and color she would never have chosen for herself. The result was effective. Looking in the small mirror, Tabitha barely recognized herself. "It's good," Andrew approved when she showed him the transformation. "Different enough that a casual glance wouldn't connect you to the posters. They packed lightly, just what they could carry in saddlebags." The documents proving Hargrove's crimes were carefully wrapped and hidden in a false bottom Andrew created in one of the bags. On the morning of their departure, Tabitha felt a strange mix of emotions: anxiety about their dangerous mission, determination to see justice done, and a flutter of something else entirely at the prospect of traveling with Andrew, posing as his wife. The ranch hands gathered to see them off, offering well wishes for their journey and the recovery of their fictitious, ailing relative. Tabitha was touched by their genuine concern, another reminder of the community she had found in this unexpected place. As they rode away from the ranch, Tabitha glanced back at the house that had become her sanctuary. "Will it be there when we return?" she asked softly, voicing the fear that had been growing in her mind. Andrew followed her gaze. "It will," he said with quiet confidence. "One way or another, we'll come back." They rode steadily through the day, keeping to less traveled routes to avoid encountering other travelers. Andrew was a skilled guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his early days in the territory. By sundown, they had covered nearly 30 miles. They made camp in a sheltered spot near a small creek, far enough from the trail to avoid detection. Andrew efficiently set up their simple camp while Tabitha prepared a meal from the provisions they'd brought. As they sat beside the small fire, eating in comfortable silence, Tabitha found herself studying Andrew's profile, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows that appeared when he was thinking deeply. "You're staring," he observed without looking up from his plate. Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking about how strange life can be," she said truthfully. "A month ago, I couldn't have imagined being here." Andrew glanced up at her then, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Regrets?" No, she answered without hesitation. Despite everything, despite the danger, no regrets. Something shifted in Andrew's expression, a softening, a vulnerability she rarely glimpsed beneath his capable exterior. "When I found you in my barn that night," he said slowly, "I thought you were just another drifter passing through. Never imagined you'd turn my life upside down." Tabitha's heart quickened. "I'm sorry for the trouble I've brought you." Andrew shook his head. "That's not what I meant." He set his plate aside and moved to sit closer to her. "Before you came, my life was empty. Just work and survival day after day, nothing more." The confession, so simply stated yet so profound, left Tabitha breathless. "And now," she asked, hardly daring to hope what his answer might be. Andrew's hand found hers in the growing darkness. "Now I remember what it means to fight for something that matters, to care about something more than just surviving." The words hung between them, their meaning clear yet still safely ambiguous. Neither of them quite ready to voice the deeper emotions that had been growing with each passing day. "We should get some rest," Andrew said finally, giving her hand a gentle squeeze before releasing it. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Tabitha nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the broken moment. They prepared for sleep, bedrolls placed on opposite sides of the dying fire, propriety maintained despite their pretense of marriage. As Tabitha lay looking up at the vast Wyoming sky, stars brilliantly clear in the moonless night, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, a future beyond their dangerous mission. A future where she and Andrew could explore these fragile feelings without the shadow of Hargrove's threats hanging over them. It was a dangerous indulgence, she knew. Their focus needed to remain on reaching Laramie, on presenting their evidence to Judge Calloway. Anything else was a distraction they couldn't afford. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, Tabitha's dreams were not of courtrooms or justice, but of a simple ranch house, a porch where two people sat watching the sunset, and a life built on honesty and trust. The second day of their journey dawned clear and cool. They broke camp efficiently and continued toward Laramie, maintaining the same careful pace, avoiding the main trails. By midday, they had reached the foothills that marked the approach to the Medicine Bow Mountains. "We'll need to cross Elk Pass tomorrow," Andrew explained as they stopped to rest the horses. "It's steeper than the main pass, but less traveled. Should get us into Laramie by nightfall tomorrow." Tabitha nodded, studying the distant mountains with apprehension. "Will there be patrols watching the passes?" "Possibly," Andrew acknowledged, "but they'll focus on the main routes. The pass I'm taking you through is known mostly to local ranchers and hunters." They continued riding through the afternoon, the terrain gradually becoming more rugged. Andrew remained alert, scanning their surroundings constantly for any sign of pursuit or danger. As evening approached, they made camp in a sheltered grove of pines. The higher elevation brought a sharper chill to the air, and Tabitha was grateful for the extra blanket Andrew had insisted she bring. Their meal was simple but satisfying: jerky, biscuits, and coffee. As they sat close to the fire, Tabitha found herself thinking about the judge they would face the next day. "Tell me about Judge Calloway," she requested. "What kind of man is he?" Andrew considered the question as he poured them each more coffee. "Fair, from what I've heard. Tough but not cruel. He's new to the territory circuit, been here less than a year. That's good for us, means he has fewer established relationships with men like Hargrove." "Do you think he'll believe us?" Tabitha asked, the anxiety she'd been suppressing bubbling to the surface. "We're asking him to act against one of the most powerful men in the territory. The evidence speaks for itself," Andrew reminded her. "These aren't just accusations, they're documents with Hargrove's own signature, proof of fraud and corruption. Any honest judge would have to take that seriously." Tabitha nodded, trying to draw strength from his confidence. "And after, if the judge believes us, what then?" Andrew's expression turned thoughtful. "Best case, Hargrove is arrested, charged with fraud. Your mother's property is returned to you." He paused, then added more soberly, "Worst case, the judge dismisses our evidence, perhaps even tries to detain you. In that scenario, we'd need to leave the territory quickly." The stark reality of their situation settled over Tabitha once more. Even if they succeeded tomorrow, her life would never be the same. She could never return to Cheyenne, to the society she'd known. Too many bridges had been burned. "If we succeed," she said slowly, "if I get the Silver Creek Ranch back, I'm not sure I could run it alone." Andrew's gaze met hers across the fire. "You wouldn't have to be alone, Tabitha." The simple statement, loaded with meaning, hung in the air between them. Tabitha's heart hammered in her chest as she recognized the offer within his words. "Andrew," she began, uncertain how to respond to what remained unspoken. A sudden crack of a twig in the darkness interrupted the moment. Andrew was on his feet instantly, gun drawn and positioned protectively in front of Tabitha. "Who's there?" he called sharply into the darkness beyond their fire's glow. "Easy, Blackwood," came a familiar voice. "It's just me." Jake, Andrew's foreman, stepped into the circle of firelight, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. "Jake," Andrew lowered his gun, confusion evident in his voice. "What the hell are you doing here?" The older man looked grim. "Bringing warning." "Marshals came back to the ranch not 2 hours after you left, asked a lot more questions this time, wanted to know exactly where you two had gone." Tabitha felt cold fear spread through her veins. "Did you tell them?" Jake shook his head, stuck to the story about the sick relative. "But they didn't believe it this time. Said they had information that Andrew was harboring a fugitive." Andrew cursed under his breath. "Someone talked. Not one of our men," Jake said firmly, "but word gets around. That reward Hargrove's offering has folks looking twice at every dark-haired woman in the territory." "Are they following you?" Andrew demanded, scanning the darkness beyond their camp. "Don't think so," Jake replied. "I took the long way, doubled back a few times to be sure. But they're organizing a search party, planning to check every trail to Laramie." Tabitha exchanged a worried glance with Andrew. Their already dangerous plan had just become nearly impossible. "We need to change course," Andrew decided, "if they're watching the routes to Laramie." "What about the judge?" Tabitha asked. "He leaves in 3 days. This might be our only chance." Andrew's expression was troubled. "Getting caught before we reach him won't help either of us." Jake cleared his throat. "There might be another way," he said. "My brother's got a place near Rock Creek. It's a day's ride east of here. Could lie low there for a bit, then approach Laramie from a different direction." Andrew considered this. "It would mean missing the first day of the court session. We'd be cutting it close." "Better than getting caught on the trail," Jake pointed out. Tabitha looked between the two men, grateful for Jake's loyalty but worried about the delay. "Could your brother be trusted with the truth?" she asked hesitantly. Jake's weathered face softened. "Madam, I've known the truth since the day after you arrived." Tabitha's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew," the old cowboy shrugged. "Been working cattle in these parts for 40 years. Get to know when a man's lying, even a good man like the boss here. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "cousins don't look at each other the way you two do." Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks, avoiding Andrew's gaze. Jake continued, seemingly oblivious to her embarrassment. "My brother Joe fought against Hargrove 2 years ago when that snake tried to claim his water rights. Lost the case but kept fighting. He'll help you, no questions asked." Andrew was silent for a moment, weighing their options. Finally, he nodded. "All right. We'll head for Joe's place at first light. Jake, you should go back to the ranch, maintain the story that we're visiting family. The less you know about our movements from here, the better." Jake nodded, understanding the logic. "Just be careful, both of you. Hargrove's got men offering cash to anyone with information. Makes folks see things that ain't there, hoping for that reward." After Jake departed, heading back toward the ranch, Tabitha and Andrew sat in troubled silence, the weight of this new development heavy between them. "I'm sorry," Tabitha said finally. "I've put you and your men in an impossible position." Andrew shook his head firmly. "Jake made his choice just as I made mine. We're not turning back now, Tabitha. We just need to be smarter, more careful." His unwavering support touched her deeply. "You have good men," she observed. "Loyal. They're family," Andrew said simply. "Not by blood, but by choice. That means something out here." The words resonated with Tabitha, reminding her of what she'd lost when her mother died, not just a parent, but a sense of belonging, of having people who stood by you no matter what. Somehow, against all odds, she'd found that again with Andrew and his ranch. "We should get some rest," Andrew suggested, banking the fire for the night. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As they settled into their bedrolls, Tabitha found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. Her mind raced with possibilities, dangers, and the unspoken words that had hung between her and Andrew before Jake's arrival. "Andrew," she whispered into the darkness, uncertain if he was still awake. "Yes." His voice came back immediately, suggesting he too had been lying awake. Tabitha hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "If this doesn't work, if we can't prove Hargrove's crimes, what will you do?" There was a long pause before Andrew replied. "Keep fighting," he said finally. "Find another way. I won't let him win, Tabitha." The simple declaration, delivered with such quiet certainty, brought unexpected tears to Tabitha's eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why risk everything for this?" For me, in the darkness, she heard Andrew shift, sitting up in his bedroll. By the faint glow of the banked fire, she could just make out his silhouette. "Because some things are worth fighting for," he said. "Justice, truth." He paused, then added softly, "You." The simple words sent a tremor through Tabitha's heart. She sat up as well, facing him across the dying embers. "Andrew, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "This isn't the time or place for certain conversations. Let's focus on getting through the next few days first." Tabitha nodded, understanding his reasoning even as her heart ached to speak the words that had been growing within her. "You're right," she conceded. "Good night, Andrew." "Good night, Tabitha," he replied, his voice carrying a warmth that wrapped around her like a blanket against the night's chill. As she finally drifted toward sleep, Tabitha held tight to the promise within his words. Whatever happened in the days ahead, she was no longer alone in her fight. And perhaps, when this was over, there would be time for those certain conversations that both of them seemed to be longing for. Dawn broke with a light drizzle that dampened their spirits as much as their clothing. They packed camp quickly and set out for Jake's brother's place, following the directions the foreman had provided. The rain increased as the morning wore on, turning the trail muddy and treacherous in places. They rode in relative silence, both too preoccupied with their thoughts and the need to stay alert for any sign of pursuit. By midday, they had reached a swift-flowing creek swollen by the rain. Andrew studied it with concern. "We need to cross here," he said, surveying the churning water. "Normally, it's just ankle-deep, but with this rain." Tabitha eyed the creek anxiously. "Is there another way around?" Andrew shook his head. "Not without adding half a day to our journey. We'll cross together. Stay close to me." He guided his horse into the water first, testing the footing. The current was strong but manageable. He turned, extending a hand toward Tabitha. "Come on, it's not as bad as it looks." Tabitha urged her mare forward, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The water rose quickly around the horse's legs, reaching its belly as they approached the middle of the creek. Suddenly, the mare stumbled on a hidden rock, lurching sideways. Tabitha cried out, clutching the saddle horn as the horse fought to regain its footing in the swift current. "Hold on." Andrew shouted, maneuvering his mount closer. The mare righted itself, but the sudden movement had dislodged one of Tabitha's saddlebags. To her horror, she watched as it slipped into the water, the bag containing the precious documents. The evidence. She cried, reaching desperately for the bag as it was swept downstream. Without hesitation, Andrew spurred his horse toward the bank, dismounted in one fluid motion, and raced along the creek's edge. The bag had caught momentarily on a protruding branch about 20 yards downstream. Andrew waded into the water, fighting the current as he reached for the saddlebag. His fingers just brushed the leather when the branch snapped, sending the bag tumbling further downstream. Tabitha had guided her horse safely to the bank and now ran along the creek's edge, watching in dismay as Andrew pursued the floating bag. The current was swift, but the creek eventually widened and slowed as it approached a bend. There, Andrew made a final lunge, plunging chest deep into the water to grab the saddlebag before it could be swept around the bend. For a heart-stopping moment, Tabitha lost sight of him. Then he emerged, soaking wet but triumphantly holding the bag aloft. "Got it," he called, wading back toward shore. Relief flooded through Tabitha. She ran to meet him as he climbed up the bank, water streaming from his clothes. "Are you all right?" she asked, taking the sodden bag from his hands. Andrew nodded, pushing wet hair from his eyes. "Nothing damaged but my pride," he assured her with a wry smile. The bag, Tabitha quickly opened it, inspecting the contents with trembling hands. The documents had been carefully wrapped in oilcloth before being placed in the bag. Andrew's foresight, potentially saving their entire mission. "They're wet around the edges, but still readable," she reported, relief evident in her voice. "Andrew, if we had lost these." "But we didn't," he said firmly. "Let's find a spot to dry out before continuing." They found shelter beneath a stand of pines where the ground remained relatively dry. Andrew changed into spare clothes from his saddlebag, while Tabitha carefully spread the documents to dry, keeping them hidden beneath the oilcloth to protect them from the occasional drops that penetrated the pine boughs. "That was too close," she said as Andrew returned, his wet clothes draped over nearby branches to dry as much as possible before they continued. "Agreed," he replied, crouching beside her to inspect the documents. "We need to be more careful with these. Without them, we have nothing but accusations against Hargrove." Tabitha nodded, the gravity of their situation settling over her once more. "How much further to Jake's brother's place?" "Another few hours if the rain lets up," Andrew estimated, glancing at the sky. "We should reach it by nightfall." They rested for an hour, allowing the worst of the dampness to dry from their clothes and the documents, then continued their journey. The rain gradually tapered off, though the sky remained heavy with clouds. By late afternoon, they had reached rolling grasslands dotted with stands of cottonwood trees. In the distance, smoke rose from a chimney, the first sign of human habitation they'd seen all day. "That's it," Andrew confirmed, pointing to a modest ranch house nestled against a backdrop of hills. "Joe Lawson's place." As they approached, a man emerged from a barn, rifle in hand. He watched their approach warily until they were close enough for him to recognize their features. "You'll be Andrew Blackwood," he called, lowering his rifle. "Jake said you might be coming." Andrew dismounted, extending a hand in greeting. "Mr. Lawson, thank you for taking us in on short notice." Joe Lawson was older than Jake, his face deeply lined from years of sun and wind. His handshake was firm as he sized up Andrew, then turned his attention to Tabitha. "Madam," he greeted her respectfully. "Jake didn't say much, just that you two needed a place to lie low for a bit, said it had something to do with Hargrove." "It's a long story," Tabitha said, dismounting carefully, the precious saddlebag clutched to her chest. Joe nodded, seemingly satisfied with her non-answer. "Any enemy of Hargrove's is welcome here. Come on inside. My wife will have supper ready soon." Martha Lawson proved to be as welcoming as her husband. A plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes. She fussed over their rain-dampened state and insisted they change into dry clothes before sitting down to the hearty meal she'd prepared. Over supper, Andrew explained their situation in careful terms, revealing enough to justify their need for secrecy without divulging specific details that might put the Lawsons at risk if questioned later. "Hargrove tried to force me off my land 2 years back," Joe confirmed, his expression darkening with the memory. "Claimed my water rights belonged to him based on some survey from 20 years ago that suddenly appeared in the county records. Forged, most likely," Andrew observed. Joe nodded grimly. "Knew it was, but couldn't prove it. Lost in court, but decided to stay and fight anyway. Been a thorn in his side ever since." He glanced at Tabitha. "Jake said you have proof of Hargrove's dealings, real proof." Tabitha exchanged a look with Andrew, who gave a slight nod of permission. "Documents showing years of fraud," she confirmed. "Property deeds with forged signatures, records of bribes to county officials, threats to those who opposed him." Joe whistled low. "That would certainly explain why he's got men combing the territory for you. Word is he's doubled the reward since yesterday." Tabitha felt her stomach clench with anxiety. "Doubled? 200 now," Martha confirmed, clearing their empty plates, and they're not just looking for you anymore. They're looking for both of you." She glanced meaningfully between Tabitha and Andrew. Andrew's expression remained calm, though Tabitha could see the tension in his shoulders. "They identified me as helping her, not by name," Joe clarified. "But they're asking about a tall rancher traveling with a dark-haired woman. Description fits you well enough." The implications were clear. Their plan to approach Laramie openly, even in disguise, had become far too dangerous. Andrew's involvement was now known, making him as much a target as Tabitha. "We need a new strategy," Andrew said after the Lawsons had retired for the night, leaving them alone in the small guest room they'd been given. Propriety had been set aside in favor of security. Martha had made up a single room with 2 narrow beds, allowing them to speak privately without raising suspicions among any farm hands who might visit the main house. Tabitha sat on the edge of one bed, the bundle of documents beside her. "Could we send the evidence with someone else, someone Hargrove's men aren't looking for?" Andrew considered this. "Joe might do it, but I'm reluctant to put him at risk. Hargrove already has reason to target him." "What about Martha?" Tabitha suggested. "No one would suspect a woman her age traveling alone to Laramie." Andrew shook his head. "Too dangerous. If she were caught with these documents, Hargrove wouldn't show mercy because of her age or gender." They sat in troubled silence, each searching for a solution that wouldn't put others at risk while still achieving their goal of presenting the evidence to Judge Calloway. "What if we don't go to Laramie at all?" Tabitha said suddenly. Andrew looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Joe mentioned that Calloway travels a circuit," she explained, her mind racing. "If he's in Laramie now, where does he go next?" Andrew's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. "We could intercept him on the road between towns, avoid Laramie entirely." Tabitha nodded eagerly. "Hargrove's men will be watching the town, the courthouse. They won't expect us to approach the judge elsewhere." "It's risky," Andrew cautioned. "Judges usually travel with security, especially in the territories. We'd need to convince them we're not a threat." "But it could work," Tabitha insisted. "We just need to know his schedule, his route." Andrew considered this, then nodded slowly. "Joe might know or could find out. Judges' circuits are generally public knowledge for those with legal business to attend to." A plan began to form between them. They would remain at the Lawson Ranch for another day, gather information on Judge Calloway's next destination, then intercept him on the road, away from Laramie and the watchful eyes of Hargrove's men. It was dangerous, improvised, and far from certain. But as Tabitha met Andrew's determined gaze across the small room, she felt a surge of hope. Together, they had come too far to give up now. "We should get some rest," Andrew suggested, his voice gentle. "Tomorrow we'll speak with Joe, see what he knows about the judge's movements." Tabitha nodded, suddenly aware of their intimate surroundings, the small room, the narrow beds separated by just a few feet. Despite the gravity of their situation, she couldn't help but be conscious of Andrew's presence, of the unspoken feelings that continued to grow between them. "Andrew," she said softly as they prepared for sleep, "if this works, if we succeed against Hargrove, what happens after?" In the dim lamplight, she saw him pause, his expression thoughtful. "That depends," he said carefully. "What do you want to happen, Tabitha?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. What did she want? A month ago, her only desire had been escape, survival. Now, her dreams had expanded to include justice, reclaiming her heritage, and something more personal, more profound. "I want a life without fear," she said slowly. "I want to rebuild what William destroyed, and—" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "I don't want to do it alone." Andrew moved to sit beside her on the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip slightly. He took her hand in his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "You won't be alone," he promised, his voice low and certain. "Whatever happens, whatever you decide, I'm with you, Tabitha." The simple declaration, spoken without flowery words or grand gestures, meant more to Tabitha than any formal profession of love. It was a promise she believed, from a man who had proven his word was his bond. Impulsively, she leaned forward, pressing her lips gently to his. Andrew remained still for a heartbeat, then responded, his hand rising to cradle her cheek with unexpected tenderness. The kiss was brief, but profound, a confirmation of what had been growing between them, a promise of possibilities to come. When they parted, Tabitha saw in Andrew's eyes the same mixture of wonder and certainty that she felt in her own heart. "We should sleep," he said softly, though his hand lingered on her cheek. "Tomorrow will bring challenges enough." Tabitha nodded, reluctantly moving back to allow him to return to his own bed. As they extinguished the lamp and darkness filled the room, she felt strangely at peace despite the dangers that still lay ahead. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Morning brought clear skies and new information. Over breakfast, Joe confirmed that after Laramie, Judge Calloway was scheduled to hold court in Cheyenne Hargrove's territory. "But he doesn't go directly there," Joe explained, spreading a rough map on the kitchen table. "The judge makes a stop at Fort Russell first, spends the night, then proceeds to Cheyenne the next day. It's his regular pattern on the circuit." Andrew studied the map, tracing the route with his finger. "When does he leave Laramie?" "Day after tomorrow," Joe replied. "Court schedule has him finishing business there, then departing for the fort early morning." Tabitha leaned closer, examining the road between Laramie and Fort Russell. "Is there a place along this route where we could safely approach without drawing attention?" Joe considered this. "There's a stretch about halfway where the road passes through cottonwood groves, provides cover, good visibility of who's coming. I've used it myself when I needed to avoid certain parties on the road." Andrew and Tabitha exchanged a meaningful glance. It was risky, but potentially their best opportunity to present their evidence directly to the judge without encountering Hargrove's men. "We'll need to leave tomorrow," Andrew decided. "Position ourselves well before the judge's party is expected." Joe nodded his agreement. "I'll have fresh horses ready for you, faster than yours, know the terrain better. And I'll pack provisions," Martha added, her practical nature asserting itself. "No telling how long you might need to wait." Tabitha was touched by the Lawsons' unhesitating support. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "You're putting yourselves at risk." Joe's weathered face hardened. "Hargrove drove my youngest brother off his land 3 years ago. Boy had to leave the territory, start over in California. Haven't seen him since." He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragement. "If you've got a chance to bring that man down, we want to be part of it." The day was spent in careful preparation. Andrew and Joe rode out to scout the nearby trails, ensuring there was no sign of searchers in the area. Tabitha helped Martha with household tasks, finding comfort in the older woman's quiet strength and practical wisdom. "How long have you known Andrew?" Martha asked as they kneaded bread dough together in the warm kitchen. "Not long," Tabitha admitted. "Just a few weeks." Martha nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Sometimes it doesn't take long to know a person's character," she observed. "Joe and I had known each other just 10 days when we decided to marry. That was 43 years ago." Tabitha's hands stilled in the dough. "How did you know he was the right one?" Martha smiled, her lined face softening with memory. "He offered me a choice when others would have decided for me, and he truly saw me when others only looked." The words resonated deeply with Tabitha. Wasn't that exactly what Andrew had done? From that first night in the barn when he'd said, "I don't mind company long as you're honest," he had offered her choices, had seen her as more than just a woman in distress. "It's not easy loving a man who stands his ground," Martha continued, her hands working the dough with practiced ease. "There will be storms, battles, times when you fear for his safety, but there's no finer partner in this life than a man of principle." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "Is it that obvious how I feel about him?" Martha's kind eyes crinkled with amusement. "To another woman, yes. Don't worry, men are often slower to see what's right in front of them, though I suspect Andrew Blackwood sees more clearly than most." When the men returned in the late afternoon, they brought news that increased the urgency of their plans. Riders had been spotted in the distance, moving in a search pattern that suggested they were looking for someone. "Hargrove's men, most likely," Joe grimly confirmed. "They're being thorough, checking every homestead and line shack in the area. How long before they reach your ranch?" Tabitha asked, fear tightening her throat. "Tomorrow, maybe the day after," Joe estimated. We need to get you two on the road before first light. That evening, they reviewed their plan one final time. They would leave before dawn, riding cross-country to reach the ambush point along the judge's route. Joe had drawn a detailed map, marking the best approach and a location where they could wait with good visibility of the road in both directions. Remember, Andrew cautioned, Calloway will have guards, probably territorial marshals. We need to approach openly, hands visible, no sudden movements. Tabitha nodded, her stomach knotting with anxiety. What if they won't listen? What if they arrest us before we can explain? We'll have copies of the most damning documents accessible, Andrew explained. If it comes to that, we show those first, demand to speak with the judge based on their contents. It wasn't foolproof, but it was the best plan they had. As they retired for the night, Tabitha felt the weight of tomorrow's gamble pressing heavily upon her. In their shared room, Andrew seemed to sense her growing fear. He sat beside her on the bed, his solid presence a comfort in the lamplight. We've come this far, he reminded her gently. Whatever happens tomorrow, we've already won something important. Tabitha looked up at him questioningly. What do you mean? You've stood up to Hargrove, Andrew said. Refused to be bullied or controlled. That courage is a victory in itself, Tabitha. His words touched her deeply. Throughout her ordeal, she had focused so intently on escape, on survival, that she hadn't recognized the strength she'd discovered within herself. I couldn't have done it without you, she said softly. Andrew shook his head. You were already running when I found you in my barn, already fighting. I just joined your battle. Impulsively, Tabitha reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, and I'm grateful every day that you did. Andrew caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. Get some rest, he murmured. Dawn comes early. Though they slept in separate beds as before, Tabitha felt the distance between them diminishing not just physically, but emotionally. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, their lives now intertwined in ways neither could have anticipated when they first met. They left the Lawson Ranch in the gray pre-dawn light, mounted on fresh horses and carrying provisions for 2 days. Martha had embraced Tabitha fiercely before they departed, whispering, "Come back when this is over. Your family now." The words had brought unexpected tears to Tabitha's eyes. Family, something she'd thought lost forever after her mother's death. Now, against all odds, she had found it again not just with the Lawsons, but with Andrew and his loyal ranch hands. They rode hard through the morning, following Joe's map across country rather than using established trails. Andrew set a pace that balanced speed with caution, always alert for signs of pursuit or danger. By midday, they had reached the area Joe had indicated, a stretch of road passing through a grove of old cottonwoods. The trees provided excellent cover while allowing visibility in both directions. This is it, Andrew confirmed, studying the surroundings. The judge's party should pass through here tomorrow morning, assuming they leave Laramie on schedule. They made a small camp well back from the road where their horses wouldn't be visible to travelers passing by. There was nothing to do now but wait and prepare for the confrontation that would determine their futures. As evening approached, they sat together near their small, carefully banked fire, reviewing the documents one final time. Tabitha had organized them in order of importance, with the most damning evidence readily accessible. If we only have a moment to make our case, she explained. These 3 documents show the clearest evidence of fraud: the forged deed to my mother's property, the letter threatening the county clerk if he didn't record the changes, and the bank transfers showing bribes to the territorial judge who ruled in Hargrove's favor 2 years ago. Andrew nodded, impressed by her thoroughness. You've thought of everything? Not everything, Tabitha admitted, her voice dropping lower. I haven't thought about what happens if this works. If we succeed against Hargrove, if I get my mother's land back, what then? Andrew was silent for a moment, adding a small branch to their fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, thoughtful. I've been thinking about that too, he admitted. Your mother's ranch is larger than mine, better water rights, prime grazing land. Makes sense to focus there if you get it back. Tabitha studied his face in the firelight, trying to read his expression. You'd consider leaving your ranch, the home you've built. Andrew met her gaze steadily. A ranch is land, buildings, cattle, important, yes, but not as important as. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, not as important as the people you share it with. The implication was clear, though still cautiously stated. Tabitha's heart raced as she recognized the offering he was making, not just help with her recovered property, but a future together, a partnership. "I wouldn't ask you to give up your home," she said softly. "You're not asking," Andrew replied. "I'm offering." "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "combining our operations would make business sense. Your water rights, my breeding stock. Together we could build something neither of us could alone." It was so like Andrew to frame his proposal in practical terms. Tabitha thought, yet she could see the deeper emotion beneath his words, the same feelings that had been growing in her own heart. "Are you asking me to be your business partner, Andrew Blackwood?" she asked, her voice teasing despite the seriousness of the moment. His smile widened, a rare, full expression that transformed his weathered face. "Among other things," he acknowledged, "but perhaps we should focus on surviving tomorrow before making longer-term plans." Tabitha nodded, though the seed of hope he had planted bloomed warm in her chest. "A wise approach," she agreed, "but for the record, I would consider such a partnership most favorably." Andrew's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, their fingers intertwining with easy familiarity. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell around them, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow might bring and the future that awaited if they succeeded. Dawn broke clear and cool, sunlight filtering through the cottonwood leaves above their small camp. They had risen before first light, ensuring everything was prepared for the judge's approach. The documents were secured in Andrew's saddlebag, easily accessible. Their horses were saddled and ready, hidden among the trees where they could mount quickly if needed. Now there was nothing to do but wait, watching the empty road stretching in both directions. Andrew had climbed a nearby rise that offered better visibility toward Laramie, while Tabitha remained with the horses, ready to signal if she spotted approach from the other direction. The morning stretched on, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Doubt began to creep into Tabitha's mind. What if their information was wrong? What if the judge had changed his plans, taken another route? Just as her anxiety was reaching its peak, Andrew appeared at her side, moving swiftly and silently through the trees. "Riders coming from Laramie," he reported, his voice low and tense. "Looks like the judge's party, 4 men traveling at an easy pace." Tabitha's heart began to race. "How do we approach them?" "We wait until they're directly in front of our position," Andrew explained. "Then we ride out slowly, hands visible. I'll do the talking initially. Judges are more likely to listen to a man first, unfortunately, but you'll need to tell your story." Tabitha nodded, fighting to keep her nerves steady. Everything they had risked, everything they had endured, came down to the next few minutes. They mounted their horses and moved to a position just within the tree line where they could observe without being seen. Minutes later, the approaching party came into view, a distinguished older man who could only be Judge Calloway, flanked by 3 younger men who appeared to be territorial marshals. Andrew gave Tabitha a reassuring nod. "Ready," she took a deep breath. "Ready." They urged their horses forward, emerging from the trees at a deliberate pace. As expected, the marshals reacted immediately, hands moving to their weapons. "Hold there," one called, positioning his horse protectively in front of the judge. "State your business." Andrew raised his hands slightly, showing he was unarmed. "My name is Andrew Blackwood. This is Tabitha Mason. We need to speak with Judge Calloway on a matter of urgent legal importance." The judge, a tall man with silver hair and shrewd eyes, studied them with open curiosity. "I hold court in proper facilities, Mr. Blackwood, not on open roads. Under normal circumstances, we would have come to you in Laramie, Your Honor," Andrew replied respectfully. "But there are men looking for us, men who would prevent this evidence from reaching you." "Evidence of what, exactly?" the judge inquired, his interest clearly piqued despite his caution. Tabitha spoke up, her voice steadier than she expected. Evidence of fraud, Your Honor, against William Hargrove of Cheyenne. A flicker of recognition crossed the judge's face at the name. He exchanged a glance with his marshals, then nodded slightly. Approach slowly, one at a time. Jenkins, check them for weapons. One of the marshals dismounted and thoroughly searched both Andrew and Tabitha, confirming they carried no firearms. Only then did the judge relax slightly. Now, Miss Mason, you mentioned evidence against William Hargrove. He's a prominent citizen, a respected businessman. What exactly are you alleging? Tabitha took a deep breath. That he forged documents to steal my mother's property after her death. That he bribed officials to record fraudulent deeds. That he's done the same to dozens of other property owners throughout the territory. Serious accusations, the judge observed, his expression neutral. I assume you have more than just your word to support these claims. Andrew carefully retrieved the packet of documents from his saddlebag, handing them to the marshal who passed them to the judge. Everything is there, Your Honor. Forged deeds with evidence of the forgery, records of bribes, threats to those who stood in his way. Judge Calloway opened the packet, his eyes widening slightly as he scanned the first document. This requires proper examination, he said finally. Not on a dusty road. You will accompany us to Fort Russell, where I can review these papers thoroughly. Relief flooded through Tabitha. The judge was willing to listen, to examine their evidence. It was more than they had dared hope for in this first encounter. Thank you, Your Honor, she said sincerely. The judge fixed her with a penetrating stare. Don't thank me yet, Miss Mason. If these documents prove false or your accusations unfounded, you could face serious charges yourself. And you, Mr. Blackwood, would be equally culpable for aiding her. Andrew nodded, his expression solemn. We understand the risk, Your Honor. But these documents are genuine and the accusations true. We shall see, the judge replied. Jenkins, McBride, ride with our guests. Carter, you're with me. The rearrangement placed Andrew and Tabitha in the middle of their party, each flanked by a marshal. It was a precaution, clearly ensuring they couldn't flee, but also providing protection if Hargrove's men were indeed searching for them. As they rode toward Fort Russell, Tabitha felt a curious mixture of relief and tension. They had accomplished their immediate goal, getting their evidence into Judge Calloway's hands, but the outcome remained uncertain. Would he believe the documents? Would he be willing to act against a man as powerful as Hargrove? And beneath these concerns lay a more personal question. If they succeeded, what would that mean for her and Andrew? The possibility they had discussed the night before a future together, combining their lands and lives, now seemed tantalizingly close, yet still fragile, dependent on too many factors beyond their control. Andrew caught her eye as they rode, offering a small, reassuring smile. In that simple gesture, Tabitha found the strength to face whatever came next. They had come this far together. They would see it through to the end, whatever that might be. Fort Russell appeared on the horizon by mid-afternoon, a sprawling military installation that served as the primary Army presence in the territory. The judge's party was recognized and admitted immediately, escorted to the commander's quarters where Calloway was apparently expected. Andrew and Tabitha were shown to a small but comfortable room and instructed to wait. A young soldier brought them water and simple food, informing them that the judge would summon them when he was ready. At least we're not in the guardhouse, Andrew observed dryly after the soldier departed. Tabitha managed a small smile at his attempt at humor. Not yet, anyway. They waited for what felt like hours, the tension building with each passing minute. Finally, the door opened to admit a uniformed officer. Judge Calloway will see you now, he announced formally. They were escorted to a large office where the judge sat behind an imposing desk, their documents spread before him. His expression was unreadable as they entered. Sit, he instructed, gesturing to the chairs facing his desk. When they were seated, Calloway leaned forward, steepling his fingers. I've had time to review some of your evidence, he began. It's compelling, particularly the forged deed to the Silver Creek Ranch. Hope surged through Tabitha. Then you believe us. I believe the documents appear genuine, the judge clarified. Whether they prove what you claim is another matter. I've sent for a handwriting expert from the fort to examine the signatures. And I've dispatched a telegram to the county recorder's office requesting verification of certain details. Andrew nodded, appreciating the judge's thoroughness. How long will these verifications take? The handwriting expert will see me this evening. The telegram responses may take until tomorrow. Calloway fixed them with a penetrating stare. Until then, you will remain here at the fort, not as prisoners but as guests under protective custody. For your own safety as much as to ensure your availability for further questions. It was a reasonable compromise, Tabitha thought, better than they might have expected, given the serious nature of their accusations against a powerful man. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said sincerely. "We appreciate your willingness to investigate this matter." The judge's expression softened slightly. "I've heard rumors about Hargrove's methods for years, Miss Mason, but rumors aren't evidence if what you've brought me proves true." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. They were escorted to separate quarters, a necessity of propriety that Tabitha understood but found frustrating. She wanted to discuss the judge's reaction with Andrew, to share her cautious optimism and lingering fears. Instead, she found herself alone in a small but clean room, with nothing to do but wait and wonder what the next day would bring. Sleep came fitfully that night. Tabitha's dreams were a chaotic mixture of hope and fear, visions of returning triumphantly to her mother's land, alternating with nightmares of Hargrove's vengeful pursuit. She was awakened early the next morning by a female attendant bringing breakfast and fresh water for washing. The woman informed her that Judge Calloway requested her presence at 9 o'clock. At the appointed time, Tabitha was escorted to the same office as the previous day. Andrew was already there, seated before the judge's desk. His presence was a balm to her nerves, and the small smile he offered as she entered gave her courage. Judge Calloway waited until she was seated before speaking. "I've received responses to my telegrams," he announced without preamble. "And the handwriting expert has completed his examination of the documents." Tabitha held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. "The expert confirms that the signatures purporting to be your mother's on the property transfer deeds are forgeries," Calloway continued. "Quite sophisticated, but definitely not authentic." Relief flooded through Tabitha, but the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the county recorder confirms that certain documents in their possession appear to have been altered after filing, specifically the dates on several deeds involving properties now owned by Hargrove." Andrew leaned forward intently. "So you believe our evidence?" "I do," the judge confirmed. "More importantly, I believe there is sufficient cause to issue warrants for Hargrove's financial records, for a complete audit of his property transactions, and for his arrest on charges of fraud." Tabitha could hardly believe what she was hearing. After weeks of fear and flight, of desperate planning and narrow escapes, justice was finally within reach. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've already dispatched marshals to Cheyenne with the warrants," Calloway explained. "Hargrove will be taken into custody today. His records will be seized as evidence." He looked directly at Tabitha. "As for you, Miss Mason, I'm preparing an injunction restoring the Silver Creek Ranch to your ownership, pending the final outcome of the case against Hargrove." Tears of relief and joy sprang to Tabitha's eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor," she managed. "Thank you for believing us." The judge's stern expression softened slightly. "Justice isn't always swift, Miss Mason, but in this territory we strive to ensure it prevails eventually. You took an enormous risk bringing these documents to me, both of you did." Andrew nodded solemnly. "It was a risk worth taking, Your Honor, indeed." Calloway gathered the documents, returning them to their original packet. "These will need to remain in official custody as evidence. You'll be provided with certified copies for your records." He rose, signaling the end of their meeting. "You're free to go, though I would recommend remaining at the fort until we have confirmation of Hargrove's arrest, for your own safety." As they left the judge's office, Tabitha felt lightheaded with relief and lingering disbelief. They had done it. Against overwhelming odds, they had succeeded in bringing Hargrove's crimes to light. In the corridor outside, away from the judge's formal presence, she turned to Andrew, unable to contain her emotions any longer. Without a word, he opened his arms and she stepped into his embrace, burying her face against his chest as tears of relief finally flowed freely. "We did it," she whispered against the rough fabric of his shirt. "I can hardly believe it's real." Andrew's arms tightened around her, his cheek resting against her hair. "Believe it," he murmured. "It's over, Tabitha, you're free, free." The word resonated through her like a bell, clear and true. Free from Hargrove's threats, free from the forced marriage he had planned for her, free to reclaim her heritage and build the life she chose. She looked up at Andrew, seeing in his blue eyes the same wonder and relief she felt. "We're both free," she corrected gently. "Free to decide what comes next." Understanding dawned in his expression, a recognition of the conversation they'd begun beside the campfire, of possibilities now within their reach. Before he could respond, a soldier approached, clearing his throat discreetly to announce his presence. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Mason. The commander has arranged quarters for you until word comes from Cheyenne, if you'll follow me." The moment broken but not forgotten, they followed the soldier to a small building near the officers' quarters. Unlike their separate rooms from the previous night, this was a small suite, a sitting room with 2 adjoining bedrooms, offering privacy but also the opportunity to talk freely. When they were alone again, Tabitha moved to the window, gazing out at the fort's busy yard where soldiers drilled and wagons moved in orderly patterns. "It doesn't seem real yet," she admitted, "after everything we've been through." Andrew came to stand beside her, his solid presence a comfort she had come to rely on. "It will take time," he said gently, "but it is real, Tabitha. You won, we won." She turned to face him, suddenly needing to say what had been in her heart for days. "Andrew, what you said before. About combining our operations if I got my land back." "I meant it," he said simply. "Every word." Tabitha took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I need to know if that offer was purely practical, a business arrangement between neighbors, or if there was more to it." Andrew's expression softened, the usual reserve in his blue eyes giving way to something warmer, more vulnerable. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. "I think," Tabitha said carefully, "that I've come to care for you in ways I never expected when you found me in your barn that night. And I hope that you might feel something similar." Andrew's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle yet sure. "Similar," he agreed, a rare smile transforming his features, "though that word doesn't quite capture it." "What word would you use?" Tabitha asked, her heart racing. Instead of answering, Andrew lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words. Unlike their previous cautious kisses, this one held nothing back, a declaration, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Tabitha Mason," he said simply. "Have since somewhere between finding you in my barn and watching you face down those marshals without flinching." Joy bubbled up within Tabitha, bright and effervescent. "And I love you, Andrew Blackwood, more than I thought possible after everything I've been through." His arms tightened around her, holding her close as if he feared she might disappear. "When all this is truly over," he murmured against her hair, "when Hargrove is behind bars and your land is legally yours again. Will you marry me, build something together that's more than just combined ranches?" Tabitha leaned back to see his face, to memorize this moment when her future realigned from one of lonely struggle to shared joy. "Yes," she answered without hesitation, "yes to all of it." Word came the next morning William Hargrove had been arrested without incident, his records seized by the territorial marshals. Judge Calloway informed them personally, his formal demeanor relaxed slightly in the face of their obvious relief. "The case against him appears strong," he advised them. "Based on your documents and what's already been found in his records, I expect he'll face considerable prison time." The injunction restoring Silver Creek Ranch to Tabitha's ownership was officially filed that same day. They were provided with certified copies of all the necessary legal documents, ensuring her claim would be recognized by the county officials. "You're free to leave the fort whenever you wish," the judge informed them, "though I'll need both of you to testify when Hargrove's case comes to trial." "We'll be there, Your Honor," Andrew assured him, "wherever and whenever needed." They decided to remain one more night at Fort Russell, giving themselves time to plan their journey back to Andrew's ranch and their future beyond that. "We should stop at the Lawsons on our way," Tabitha suggested as they discussed their route. "Let them know what happened, thank them for their help." Andrew nodded, smiling at the thought of sharing their good news, all of it with the couple who had risked so much to help them. "And then to my ranch," he added. "The men will be worried, especially Jake." "And then?" Tabitha asked, though she already knew the answer. Andrew's eyes met hers, warm with promise. "And then to Silver Creek, to see what's been done to your land, what needs to be fixed." "Our land," Tabitha corrected gently. "If we're to be married, what's mine is yours. That's how partnership works, isn't it?" Andrew's expression softened with love and something like wonder. "That's exactly how it works," he agreed. "Partners in everything." They left Fort Russell the next morning, supplied with fresh provisions and accompanied by a small escort of soldiers for the first leg of their journey, a precaution the commander had insisted upon, despite Hargrove's arrest. The trip to the Lawsons' ranch was uneventful, the Wyoming landscape spreading around them in spring glory. Tabitha found herself seeing it with new eyes, not as terrain to be navigated in fear, but as the home it would now become, the land where she and Andrew would build their life together. Joe and Martha welcomed them with open arms and tearful joy, having already heard rumors of Hargrove's arrest but eager for the full story. They shared a celebratory meal, during which Andrew formally announced their engagement, much to Martha's delight. "I knew it," the older woman declared, embracing Tabitha warmly. "Knew it from the moment I saw you two together." They stayed one night with the Lawsons before continuing to Andrew's ranch, where Jake and the other hands greeted their return with equal parts relief and curiosity. The story of their adventure and their engagement spread quickly, resulting in an impromptu celebration that lasted well into the night. In the days that followed, they began the process of merging their lives and lands. They rode to Silver Creek Ranch together, Tabitha's emotions a complex mixture of grief and joy as she saw her childhood home for the first time in years. The main house had been neglected, used only occasionally by Hargrove's foreman. The barns and outbuildings were in similar disrepair, though the land itself remained as rich and beautiful as she remembered. "It will take work," Andrew observed as they stood on the porch, surveying what would need to be done. "But we can bring it back, better than before." Tabitha leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Together," she agreed, "just as we've done everything else." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Andrew's ranch, with Jake serving as best man and Martha standing as Tabitha's matron of honor. Judge Calloway, in a gesture that touched them both deeply, rode from Cheyenne to perform the ceremony himself. "Consider it my way of ensuring this union is properly and legally documented," he told them with a rare smile. "After all you've been through, there should be no question about the validity of your marriage." As spring turned to summer, they divided their time between both properties, beginning the work of restoration at Silver Creek while maintaining operations at Andrew's ranch. They decided to make the larger Silver Creek house their primary residence once renovations were complete, while keeping Andrew's ranch as an important part of their expanded operation. Hargrove's trial came in late summer, requiring them to travel to Cheyenne to testify. It was a difficult experience for Tabitha, facing her stepfather across the courtroom, but Andrew's unwavering support gave her the strength to tell her story clearly and completely. The evidence against Hargrove was overwhelming. He was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and corruption, sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His financial empire crumbled, with many of his ill-gotten properties returned to their rightful owners. As they rode away from Cheyenne for the last time, Tabitha felt the final weight lift from her shoulders. It's truly over now, she said, the realization bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. Everything he took, everything he tried to take from me, justice has been done. Andrew reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand in his. Your mother would be proud, he said softly, and your father too. Tabitha nodded, squeezing his hand gratefully. I think they would be proudest of my choice in husband, she replied with a smile. A man who offered shelter to a stranger in a storm, who asked only for honesty, and who gave everything in return. Andrew's eyes crinkled with the smile that was becoming more frequent as their life together unfolded. Best decision I ever made, he said simply, finding you in my barn that night. As they rode toward home, toward the life they were building together, Tabitha silently agreed. From desperate beginnings in a storm-lashed barn had grown a love stronger than she had ever imagined possible. A love founded on honesty, forged through adversity, and now free to flourish in the wide Wyoming skies they both called home.